All right, how's everyone doing? Thanks for checking out the Rich CELENZA show. WTF are you talking about? So I'm actually in the car again, driving. Hopefully the audio will still be pretty good. I got to actually drive from, where am I at? I'm in Kansas City. I got to go to Nebraska, then actually visit both of the Dakotas, which is interesting because I've been everywhere in the United States for the most part. Every state except the two Dakotas and Montana, which is very interesting. I've been to every other major city, including Canada that I know of, and state. And so anyways, what I want to get into today is regarding a segment that I want to call My Parents Made Me Who I Am. So, I don't think people really realize how much they are like their parents, right? Or they don't want to acknowledge this or admit it. And now that I'm going on to 50 years old, I've been spending a lot of time with my mother and father. I talk to them almost daily. And I'm shocked at how much especially as I'm getting older, how much I behave like them. I sound basically at this point exactly like my father, voice-wise. I think a lot of my actions when I'm with him, I don't know what, when I'm even talking to him on the phone, I'm almost like I'm listening to my own brain by a lot of things he's saying, the comments, the way he's reacting. And I find that unbelievably interesting. I don't necessarily look exactly like my father. There are a lot of similarities. My actions are very much like him and his brother. And my mother, I look a lot, the more I'm getting older, I look a lot like her as well, which is quite interesting. I always said if you smashed my mother and father's face together, basically you'd have mine. And I think what I realized in my case over the years was a lot of times I would always fight not wanting to be like my parents, wanting to be very different. Both of them have very strong personalities. Both are actually very strong in their opinions. To a certain degree, they're very demanding. They're very strong-willed. You're not going to break them. I don't know if it's from being, just coming from an Italian background. My mother's just fierce to us, and my dad just, at times, even says he comes off very offensive. He really doesn't give a fuck what anyone thinks about him, what he says or does, and it's almost his way or the highway. My mother's more on her own. She's been for a very long time, so she's really, to a certain degree, set in her ways, which I understand that. But I think I can't speak for everybody because everybody's raised in a different environment. But I think for the most part, if we really step back to understand who our parents are, really, and what they went through, and I don't think people realize that, I think we took for granted what our parents did for us, right? I think we're just, for the most part, spoiled ourselves, and then we went in turn to spoil our kids as well. But I was born in the late 60s. I dealt with parents that were actually divorced at a very young age. So I was like 5 years old when they actually separated. My mother and father owned a nightclub. My father was a very known hairstylist inside Chicago, and then he claims the Beatles came in and it killed men's hairstyles. He should have probably went the woman route, but he didn't. So he went and kind of went after his dream of owning a nightclub, restaurant, bar, go-go club, and he was actually very successful. He's unbelievable at that. And then my mother, at a very young age, had me at 18, and then at 20 years old, she's running a nightclub. She wasn't even old enough legally at that time when they first started, but then the drinking age dropped to 18, but she was literally in a club, running a club, working the door and bartending when she wasn't even legally old enough to be there in general, which is quite interesting. My father always said my mother was the best doorwoman or doorman she ever had. Not only was she tough as nails, but you just couldn't bullshit her with fake IDs or any of those things. So she didn't take shit from anyone. Even though cops would come in and raid his place all the time trying to find underage people, and they never did because my mother was pretty efficient and just awesome at doing that, I guess. But to make a long story short, they divorced. So I had two really parents that decided to go absolutely in opposite directions. So my mother fell into religion very hard. She was a diehard Catholic. And I think my father's mother, being the first Catholic she was around, actually, is where she started to learn a lot about that. And then obviously we have Italian immigrants. Our grandparents were all from Italy, and they were Catholic as well. And I think my mother getting a divorce, her being the only one in her entire family, and we had at that time, we still have a massive family. I probably have 100 and, I don't even know at this point, 50, 170 cousins. It's just massive. And my mother's aunts, uncles, cousins. My mother's actually the oldest out of all them cousins, but to make a long story short, cousins on different sides of the family, was divorced, and her mother was divorced. So my mother's mother had her at 15. My mother had me at 18. So a lot of people, I tell people, thought that my mother was my sister growing up, and my grandmother was my mother, and then I had a great-grandmother from Italy that was around as well. But my grandmother, my mother's mother, was divorced as well with 6 kids. And then when my mother got divorced, it was almost like my grandmother was surrounded by 7 kids, because I kind of fell into the loop. My mother's the oldest sibling, and then I almost became, even though I'm the grandchild or the nephew to my mother's brothers and sisters, I'm very close in age to them. But back to my mother trying to raise, I think my mother really wanted to raise me to be a priest. And I just had this discussion recently, or maybe a preacher of some sort, a Christian preacher, because for one, she started to send me to Bible studies on Wednesdays, and then she did her thing as well. And then on weekends, obviously, I was going to CCD, and that's just for like Catholic education for children and teenagers, whatever. On Sundays, before you go to Mass, you get confirmed, and then you get a confirmation, and that's where you get your communion. All those type of things. And then my mother was really going to a lot of different things, even the ones where they're putting their hands on you and doing all these things, which, speaking in tongues, now this is back in the 70s and 80s and whatever, my mother, I think just lived in fear, and she just, I don't know what she thought by getting me maybe to be a priest or become something very religious, kind of got her a pass into heaven. I don't know what her belief system was. And then on the other hand, now my father, let me throw myself into there, he wanted me basically to take over his nightclub. So starting from the age of 2 years old on, and my mother didn't keep me away from my father at all. My mother, even though we were in environments that I probably shouldn't have been in as a child, and my father always treated me as an adult because I think the way I behaved, and he started to take me to nightclubs, other ones, bands. I've seen so many people in concerts, comedians, and he groomed me to be kind of, I guess you could say, a nightclub owner. Kind of like a mini Hugh Hefner, because I think my dad has a lot in common with Hugh Hefner, which is funny. He used to come in and get his hair cut by my father, and my father really, I think, was like, who the fuck is this dork running the show? My father's just much more handsome, flamboyant, stylized, all these things, but that's kind of the way my father wanted to raise me. So then, if you fast forward some time, my mother still started to send me to a lot of religious functions, including religious camps where you go, they're preaching to you all the times. The whole camp is revolved around Bible study, which was very exhausting, retreats, that. Then I went to a Catholic high school, graduated from there. I always had my issues with not the Catholic religion. It was the priests, the deacons, the brothers. That was a personal thing with me that I've always had. I didn't necessarily like the way they behaved or trusted them. Again, strictly on me. That has nothing to do with anybody individually. My mother's hilarious. Lately, she's had some issues herself with religion because I think she thought I was molested, which I 100% wasn't. But at a very young age, my father went to a military school, Christian Catholic military school. He told me from a very young age to stay away from a lot of the priests, deacons, brothers, which I did, not to trust them. He just programmed me that way. And as you know, a lot of things are coming out now regarding the Catholic religion. But I was way ahead of the curve with that. I refused to even go on retreats with them, even while I was in high school, or be around them. So, I kind of would. Now I'm going to fast forward to now back to who I am now, which I realized. But I've been analyzing a lot of things in my life, and one of the things I found quite interesting, I think, is as I was getting older in my 20s and I got married and all these things, I actually wanted to be the opposite of what my parents were. I was just exhausted from them kind of trying to push their values on me, which were fine. They were wonderful. Their agenda, I guess you could say. My father went on to retire at a very young age, then opening a very large vending business, gaming, putting equipment in all different bars, nightclubs. So I was collecting money in and out of there. I like gambling as well. But I was always I was exhausted by the time I was in my 20s from loud music, the nightlife, I guess you could say. I was just exhausted. I was fried. Even when I got married, I never wanted to go in bars, never wanted to go in clubs. My father still loved them. I felt like a veteran. I was just exhausted. And then on the religious component, again, I was so Ma, I don't want to hear one more thing religious. I don't want to even look at a Bible. I don't want to hear anyone preach. I don't want any of it. And I would actually get into arguments with my mother. And I once got in a real bad argument with her. She once flew to Florida to visit me. I was screaming about the Pope, about a disagreement we had. And then she wanted me to take her back to the airport. She was so hurt. And I'm like, what the fuck is wrong? Why would you do that to your mother? But I just thought my mother was being overprogrammed at that point in time with religion. I still do, to a certain degree. But she's lightened up a lot, I think, because the more information that gets out there, the more she learns about everything, which, thank God, my mom has become very open-minded regarding that. And my father opened another restaurant after the vending business, and then he's retired. So he's lightened up, too. Obviously, he still loves, I just took him out to a gala. He was dancing, having a blast. So he still loves the nightclub lifestyle and all of that. He'll never get that out of his system. He's very flamboyant. He drives a Zimmer and whatever. So but now as I'm getting older, I see us kind of all coming together, if that makes sense. And after I ended up getting a divorce, in which I never wanted to get to, I realized how much, after I got divorced, I was like my father. I think I was suppressing a lot of things to say, no, I'm not, I only want to dress this way, be very conservative, or I want to only do this, I don't want to do that, I don't want people to see me in this light. Finally, I just had to say, forget all the bullshit. Just become who you are. Stop trying not to be like your dad, or stop trying not to be like your mom, or stop trying to be this or that. Just be who you are. And I kind of went back to my roots again, and I talked about this before, where when I was younger too, I was with my immigrant Italian grandparents and relatives, and I was really, really exhausted from, the Italian thing. Everything in my life was Italian. My mother was an Italian cook. My grandparents, everything was Italian. We weren't even allowed to, it's weird, we couldn't even have St. Patrick's Day. My mother didn't celebrate Halloween. It was all about St. Joseph Day and all these different things. But what was interesting is they never really taught me the language, which I never understood. I think my grandparents, and I've said this before, maybe on a podcast, I think they just didn't want us to come off but anything American, I guess you could say, without accents. I don't know what it was. But I was really, I was still, obviously, I knew I was Italian. I dressed that way. I behaved that way all through, especially the 80s and 90s. There's no getting away. My identity was Italian, and I wasn't saying that. But I found it quite interesting because my mother moved to a suburb for a while, and in there were only two of us that were Italian, and they would call us grease balls, wops, dagos, funny shit. And then when I would go back to Italian neighborhoods where our family was from, they would call me a preppy kid, which made no sense. Each was kind of calling me, each said, I don't know what the hell they were thinking, but so no matter where I went, somebody had something to say, which I found quite interesting. But so yes, after my divorce, I really just said, be who the hell you want to be. And I think I started to just become slowly but surely more like my father. And I think some things started to aggravate my mother, because then I think she thought I was a certain person when I was married or throughout my life, because I was kind of always suppressing it or fighting who I was. And I just said, this is who I am. I started to, I wrote a book, I don't think that you really like, called Wingman. It's the must-have guide to pick up the woman of your dreams, or women of your dreams. And maybe she didn't like the tone and some of the things I was talking about, or some of the photos that I used for the cover of the book. and all those things, because again, I was always suppressing what I wanted to do, because I'm like, oh, I'm a family man, or I have daughters, or what would my mother think about me, or what would my dad think about me? Would my dad not even like it? Would he like it? Would he go? Whatever the case may be, I think, again, by us when we were younger, we were programmed so much by our parents, which is not their fault. They're raising us. And that goes for, obviously, you sprinkle in your siblings, cousins, friends, aunts, uncles, all that. We're kind of all being programmed by our family members. And I goof around, but I really kind of believe it to a certain point. I think like 25% of me is my mother, 25% is my dad, the other 50% is everybody else kind of that I'm around, that I kind of conformed into, because that's what you're kind of doing. You're picking up all these different traits, and from our language, the way we talk, our actions, I think our food. And now, don't get me wrong, a lot of people are raised in certain environments and then they break out of them because they have nothing to do with those environments, and I get it 100%. But in my case, I was, like I said, raised in an Italian background. I was kind of exhausted from that, but then as I got older, I just went full circle and just started to gravitate towards it more and more and more, because I think when I was younger, I was around so many more Italians speaking Italian. Everything was really Italian in the 70s, from feasts. I mean, it was just engulfed in that. And then when I went to Italy, 4 years ago, I felt like I was home. I'd never felt like that before. And my grandparents used to goof around and say, hey, you were born in the wrong country, Richie. You should have been born in Italy, because the way your sleeping patterns are, the only foods you like to eat, and all these different types of things. But when I went to Italy, I was like, holy shit. So again, I think I was a huge part of my grandparents programming me as well, because again, when we're younger, especially in that day and age, it wasn't like we went to daycare or anything. So from 0 to 5 years old, I'm with my mom, dad, grandparents. I mean, that's who I was with, and cousins, aunts and uncles. And I went with my 2 uncles to Italy, which was fascinating to me, because my dream was to take them to Italy, and one of them was sick at the time or whatever. But what was really interesting was the way they behaved and their actions. And I really got to spend a couple weeks with my uncles, like 24 hours a day. I'm like, holy shit, I am so much like these guys. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I would almost, I was just kind of fascinated how, I haven't been around my uncles to that level. I see them at family doings and parties, and I live in Florida, they live in Chicago. Again, they're talking, and it's almost like I'm almost like just our minds are locked in on the same things. And I used to, again, fight those type of things, but now as I'm getting older, I actually quite love those things. And I think the one thing you got to have in your life is, what I'm getting to is having a lot of patience to discover truly who you are, who kind of raised you, and be open-minded for a lot of, don't be afraid to kind of gravitate towards what you were, I think, in your youth, or just be open-minded towards other people's beliefs. Because I know as we all got older, we changed. Like even my family members, some aren't Catholics, some are Christians, some are nothing, some Baptist, I don't know. They're all these, some are Jehovah Witnesses even, all these different, even politics-wise, some are, on one side, some are on another, some are neutral. And I think what we really got to realize is just to be patient and open-minded, especially with our family members as we're getting older, especially with our own kids. But really think about what you're saying and doing and your actions towards others, because I was kind of an asshole. I was like my great-grandfather, Giuseppe, Nono Joe over there, and he just didn't give a shit. A lot of foreigners, or at least the foreigners I was around, a lot of Italians, and I hang out with a lot of Italians from Sicily and Naples and everywhere. I don't know if they get the pass, but when they're in America, they just kind of say and do whatever they want to do a lot of times, and people are like, oh yeah, they're Italian, that's how they are. But if you're American or born here, you can't do that, because you're considered inappropriate, or you're an asshole, or you're arrogant, or all these things. But words mean a lot. Words can definitely hurt. Actions hurt a lot, man. They hurt. Really realize that. And I see a lot of people disrespecting a lot of older people, because they think they're kind of outdated, especially now with technology and things. I find it quite funny, though, with the old-timers. They want to use technology to their advantage, but they don't want to use technology. And a lot of people, including myself at times, don't want to be bothered helping the older people. But I try to help out as much as I can. But I'm just saying, because you lose patience with them. My father won't even use a damn GPS. Now, see, you flip it. My mother learned how to use the GPS. Now she goes everywhere. My father, who used to go everywhere, now doesn't use a GPS. And now he needs directions everywhere, and he can't go anywhere. So that's kind of funny how that worked out. But having the patience also with yourself. You know, you got to realize you're not perfect. And you did come from certain backgrounds. They may have been good, bad, whatever the case may be. If you were, you know, I just had a cousin pass away. He had a heart of soul, you know, drugs, and went to Vietnam and all them things. And again, he was from Cicero, and I think he got wrapped up with a lot of different things. And he just had a hard life. And the thing was, he just couldn't break out of it. And, you know, it's easy for anyone to say, he should have done this, should have done that, because addictions, and we're all raised differently. You know, again, we're all programmed by different people. You know, who was in your life at the beginning, I think a lot of times really is setting the path for your future. Not everybody. You know, a lot of people have horrific beginnings and end up very successful. I have family members like that, and a lot of people I know that ended up with really great parents, very wealthy, or always there, ended up drug addicts, dead, alcoholics, all different things, right? But I think you as an individual really have to step back and say, you know, forget even the way you look in front of your kids, and forget the way you may feel in front of your parent, or, you know, forget all of that. Just look at yourself as a separate entity. What do you feel like? What are your actions telling you about yourself? Are they real? Are they fake? Are you performing? Are you not who you want to be? Because we're all in this shell. We were born without, you were just born, you had no say-so in the matter. You're right? No, I mean, unless you want to kill yourself, you're in it for the long run. You cannot escape your own body or your own mind. Your shell, you're stuck in this shell. I talk about that all the time. You're not escaping yourself. You know what I mean? I don't care what you do. And even if you try to entirely reprogram your brain, because I have a lot of friends that ended up religious freaks, or all these different things that wanted to like change their whole history and their past and forget about it. For the most part, that's almost impossible. That's impossible. Who you were born and raised with, for the most part, is a huge part of who you are. You're either, again, suppressing it or pretending it didn't exist. That doesn't mean you can't change your life entirely. I'm not saying you can't move to another country, or you can't go after different dreams or aspirations, languages. I mean, you can basically change your complete identity. But even in the background, in your head, you're still that person, and those people still did raise you. Now, even if you were adopted, or whatever you went through, I don't know what that is. But I could assure you, you can't escape yourself. I talk about that. You can run, but you can't hide. You can't hide from yourself. I presume that's why a lot of people become drug addicts, alcoholics, maybe even religious freaks, or very involved in politics, or whatever their thing is, maybe because that fulfills them, which is wonderful. And here's the thing regarding all that. I am not here to judge anybody. I do judge people that hurt other people. There's no question about that. That I am not down with. So I believe in free will, but not free will in the case where you think you're going to go out and hurt people, even verbally, physically, or any of that shit. Because I really believe it's easy to hurt anybody, especially physically. That's a joke. But it's really hard to heal somebody, right? So I'd rather heal somebody or help somebody. That's what's hard. Like a doctor, what he does is hard. To stab somebody is easy. To go do surgery is hard, is I guess what I'm trying to say in a nutshell to a certain degree. And I talk about this all the time with my Mastering Self-Confidence program I have, where I'm trying to help men find the woman or women of their dreams, or help them with their identity, is stop lying to yourself and stop giving yourself an out. Because a lot of people have a lot of excuses why they're not succeeding, or why they keep ending up in the same position, or why whatever their problem is, they don't want to confront the problem. Stop lying and pretend there's not a problem. The fucking problem is right in front of you. You're the problem a lot of times. We don't want to admit when we're wrong. We don't want to admit when we're lying. We don't want to admit that we're bullshitting. We don't want to admit all these things. What we will admit is, oh, my job sucks, or my relationship sucks, or this sucks, and boo-hoo for all of us. If I lined up 100 people, everyone's got their own problems, right? Everybody has different issues they're going against, either themselves emotionally or physically. They have parents, what they went through. Did they lose their parents? There's always going to be probably sickness involved, no matter who you know. People are going to pass away. You know, you are going to die, obviously. So what you need to realize is no one's going to save you but you. No one can save you but you. I always say, the minute you realize you don't need anybody to make yourself complete is when you are. It's true, man. Like, that's how it is. And when you have to have a certain type of mindset saying, I'm not going to get murdered, most likely. Maybe I will. That's it, whatever. Or killed, or this. But something's going to take me out. It's either, everyone thinks they want to go to bed and die in their sleep. That's okay. I get that too. But something's going to happen to me where I die. It could be a car accident. I could die of a disease. I can die of anything. I can drown. I can burn. There's tons of different ways I'm going to die. So something is hunting me. There's no, in my eyes, it's just, when is that day? Can I fight it? Sure. You try to fight it the most you can if you want to live, your life as long as you can, if that's what you're interested in. But I'll be honest, at different times, I'm like, I fly in so many airplanes, sometimes I'm just like exhausted in life. And I think a lot of us are. And it's not that I definitely don't want to go down in an airplane crash, but a lot of times I always take that one step into the plane. I'm like, is this the last few steps of my life? Or even if sometimes I get in a car, and like there was really bad weather yesterday, I flew into the Midwest with ice and trucks were sliding and stuff. And I'm like, I think about that a lot. Is this the last time I'm going to be doing this? Is this my last great meal? So to flip that, I'm always trying to do a lot of things I like to do and not waste my time. There's an Italian expression, or I saw in this movie, and it was in Italian. I can't remember the name of this title, but he says you come to a realization in your life when you stop doing things you don't want to do. And I know that's hard, because you may say, hey, I don't like to go to work. I don't like to do this. Well, I don't know what to tell you on that point, but a lot of small things you need to realize you can start doing to make yourself happy. That will hopefully lead to more and more. But stop wasting your time and wasting your life. And acknowledge everything you're doing is because you want to do it. Now, I don't know if that's back to our parents programming us the way we ended up, but a lot of things I think as we got older, we took on that our parents don't do. So hypothetically, my mom and dad, I don't play video games, for instance, but I think a lot of guys my age or whatever jumped on the video games, let's say, right? Or they jumped on things their parents had nothing to do with, which is quite interesting, right? And neither really, one of my parents drink, right? Smoked. They don't have addiction issues. None of that stuff, which really I don't have those either, which is quite interesting. I did like gambling, right? I guess you could say I'm an addiction to working out. Now, my mother was doing yoga at a young age, and my dad was an incredible athlete, but I loved weights. And I think when I was getting bigger and bigger and bigger with weightlifting, bodybuilding, and powerlifting, they didn't understand that because they thought I was abusing my body. So my mother and father don't have a insecure atmosphere, whatever you want to say. Not atmosphere, that's the wrong word. Insecure feelings regarding their body. I think they both had great bodies at a young age, and they're really in great shape now for the most matter. I guess I had an insecurity. I called it reverse anorexiism, where no matter how big I got, I felt thin. My dad, I think, is the other way. He thinks he looks like a god, and my mother is just fine with how she was. I don't know where this complex or whatever that is, and they never understood that. My mom still doesn't. She was just screaming at me the other day, saying, your arms are getting too big again. They're as big as your head, or why do you do this? My dad, when I was really big, said, are you fat or strong or heavy? Like, he couldn't stand that I was getting heavier and bigger and bigger and bigger. He was all about being very similar to the European. He's tall and thin and fit. He wants his suits to look immaculate, like very thin and everything straight lines. Where I'm trying to come in and get a shirt that's a 3, 4, 5X. I wanted to be, 260 pounds. I got up to like 250. And I actually, in turn, started to damage my body. And my parents didn't understand that. So now that I step back, I'm like 200 pounds now. I realized I had some type of mental illness. Why? I have no idea. Was I programmed that way? Not at all. Very interesting, right? All right, so we hit the 30-minute mark here. So that's really all I wanted to get into regarding parents and I really believe are a lot of who you were obviously programmed by as a child. Me, I was my parents. So, and I know a lot of people don't necessarily were born and raised with 2 parents. Some were born and raised with 1. You may have, again, been adopted. 2 of my close friends, they adopted children, which is amazing. I see them. And it's quite interesting because I haven't seen their children kind of program into their life. And I sometimes wonder, especially from an adopted standpoint, say, obviously there's 3 of them. A couple of my friends, one got 2, one got 1. And you wonder if they were raised in a different household. And again, they're going to have their own beliefs as they get older and their own actions and all these things. But it's funny how they kind of slowly, all of the children conformed, obviously, into what the parents are. Down to the food, down to their, the language, obviously, their actions. A lot of those kids even look like they're from those parents. Because, the parents, again, dress them a certain way. Some are religious, some aren't. Some are more into education, some more into sports. And it's funny how that kind of flows, how they take on that identity. And I think that's the thing I'm trying to describe is, sometimes maybe we were born in that environment and we can't change that. And sometimes we just need to learn, I think, more than anything, is this is who we are. Be happy with who you are. Look at yourself being very fortunate. When I was younger, I was kind of embarrassed at times because I'm going into a nightclub with my dad and all these kids were going home to their moms and dads. And then as I got older, I'm doing all these unbelievable things. When I started hitting my teens, like my friends were like, oh my God, you do all this shit with your old man. You travel to Florida, you go to California, you do this. He owns a club, he does. And I used to be like, oh my God, I'm actually very fortunate. But you looked at it from a different perspective. I'm like, my parents are divorced. That was kind of embarrassing. I'm like, oh, I'm always there. My dad wasn't there at certain things. My mom was always there. But I'm like, oh, I'm the only guy without a dad. You got all these functions. And then I ended up having a stepfather who was wonderful. And I ended up living with him in an Italian neighborhood, Melrose Park, which was, I look back at my life now and I say, this is fascinating that I was so fortunate to be in these environments. And I think a lot of people don't realize how fortunate they were to have the parents they have. Maybe even the siblings they have. Even if the siblings ended up in a bad situation or maybe didn't even treat you that well, because I had one uncle that I was raised with, who was like my brother, always fighting, always beefing, like our whole life was fighting. I mean, literally punching ourselves in the face. Like I was like an animal with him, but he really made me, in my eyes back then, so tough for me. Like he made me into kind of the man I am to a certain degree. We're taking no prisoners. And actually both of my uncles were just brutal, my younger uncles. We were raised like brothers, and I'm very fortunate to have them in my life. And now that we're all older, we kind of all met at around, now we all have families, we all have kids. And I love them for that. I love that they kicked the shit out of me and didn't, let me get away with a lot of things, especially because I didn't have a father there a lot of times. They needed to put the hammer down. Sometimes what we think, we're being antagonized or being bullied or picked on, it's really, we may be at that time, but it really shapes us into who we're going to become and what we can tolerate. And I think our parents do that as well. And we need to give them a lot of credit. So, all right. Well, anyways, thanks for listening to the Rich CELENZA Show. WTF are you talking about? I have a Mastering Self-Confidence program, like I mentioned. That's called The Blueprint. It's called Mastering Self-Confidence, actually. The Blueprint to helping men find the woman or women of their dreams, even if they've been through a bad breakup or divorce. I also have a YouTube channel that's just Rich CELENZA. You're obviously on my podcast. So, my YouTube channel, I cover all these different things. I give people pointers on how to travel affordably, go to unique places as in restaurants, bars, sometimes clubs, sometimes coffee houses, gyms. I give a lot of advice on fitness. I think that's one of my strongest components. But that's really all I got for you today. All right, take care, and if you're traveling, safe travels or driving. And don't forget, call your parents. Try to talk to them every day, text them every day. Tell them you love them. You know what I mean? No one's around forever, I'll tell you that, and including yourself. Tell your kids as well, your cousins, your uncles. I tell my uncles, my aunts, everybody, and I'm not the most loving person in the world by any means, but I tell them I love them, and I can't wait to see them. So, all right, take care.